There is so much waste in a remodeling project that's not done right.
Yeah, they're getting paid.
Like absolutely ridiculous scenarios. 4 or 5 years later, the guy's literally wanted by the FBI.
Yeah, you might be the guinea pig for a project if you think that if the contractor seems like he's good enough and he's saying, yeah, I can do that. Absolutely, I can do that.
All right, so today on the podcast here, we're going to talk about remodeling horror stories and how not to be one. So as you know, as a remodeling company that's been around for 16, 17 years, we have talked to lots of clients that either had a remodeling horror story in the past, have talked to friends who have, and are concerned that they're going to sign up for one, or unfortunately, more often than I like, we're hired to come in and clean up a mess where a contractor got fired or disappeared or something like that. So let's kick it off. And what we're going to do is let's talk about some of the different categories of problems and issues we've seen. One of the first, I think, is a cost plus contractor. And this sounds like a really good idea to a lot of people, but it can not turn out well. So David, key us off here. Like what sounds good about a cost plus contractor?
Well, I think a lot of what sounds good is it sounds like it's an open budget. You can see everything that's going on. They're going to submit their receipts. They're going to submit their labor hours. You're going to be able to see everything. So it sounds like total transparency.
Yeah.
It sounds like complete control for the client over the budget and what we're doing and why and when and where. So I think that's like the biggest thing is that transparency sounds really appealing. How better to protect yourself against a bad contractor than total transparency?
Yeah.
That's the appeal.
Yeah. So you're able to protect yourself against a bad contractor because you can see absolutely every cent that goes in the project, absolutely everything he's making. Where can that go wrong, or where have we seen it go wrong?
Well, I've seen it go wrong in a lot of different areas, but I think the primary one is while it is transparent, depending on what you're looking at, it's also a false transparency. You really don't get to see everything. And sometimes even the bills presented are not even for your project. We had one project where the guy was handing lumber bills in to the client. This was not our project. This is a different contractor where he's handing them bills from the lumber supplier, and they're just like, oh, okay, here's the check for that one. Here's the check for that one. They get a call 3 months later from the lumber supplier saying, we're going to put a lien on your home because you haven't paid for the lumber. And they're like, wait, no, we paid for that lumber. And they're like, no, you didn't. We've got this bill for $30,000. It's all the lumber supplied to your project and nobody's ever paid for it. Mm-hmm. Your address is where it was delivered. And he goes back and looks at the bills, and sure enough, he'd been paying for somebody else's lumber. But it was not readily apparent on the bills. So you've got an actual lack of transparency. You also are essentially writing a blank check to the contractor because they control the amount of time, scope, effort that often goes into those projects. Yeah. So same project, the contractor comes back to the client and says, hey, we got to adjust and work on the road into your property in order to get the trusses in. They're like, okay, I guess that makes sense. Big trusses, big truck, you got to do a little bit of road work. $100,000 later, I'm not even joking. They'd put some gravel down and done some road adjustments.
Yeah, and if I remember right, like this was the same road that they'd got another quote, a hard quote, before they started talking to this cost plus contractor guy for like $15K to like clean up this road. Yep. And what ended up happening, I think, and this was somebody we know, and so they talked to us about the project throughout, like they ended up like dropping a culvert in there and like doing an insane amount of road work.
Yeah, I mean, this was earlier on in our company's history. We did the design for the project, and the client was, they essentially elected to go with a different builder that they had more confidence in. And he was a cost plus contractor. It wasn't fixed price. So they felt like there was better transparency there. And they ended up in a horrible, horrible situation. It was one of those like absolutely ridiculous scenarios. 4 or 5 years later, the guy's literally wanted by the FBI.
Oh my!
It went nuts. He went from trusted contractor to completely milking this project.
Yeah.
In a transparent quote way. He was telling them, here's the bills, here's the hours, here's what we're putting into it. Mm-hmm. And they were paying the bills because it felt like it was transparent, and they came out really in the wash.
Yeah, but the other issue with that is particularly with a cost plus guy that self-performs, you've got a massive muddy issue of like all his self-performed hours.
Yeah, how long?
Right? So like, what's his actual billable rate? Mm-hmm. Well, his billable rate is probably a padded billable rate. Right. Mm-hmm. And then if you sign a cost plus contract with a guy that is self-performing the work, like that's literally a blank check. Mm-hmm. There's no cap because the contract is cost, whatever it costs, however long it takes, however many hours he decides to put into it, plus something on top of that.
Right.
And so it's literally a blank check.
Yeah, there's a little bit less due diligence done up front too, because it's going to take what it's going to take, and it's going to cost what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
So all the incurred costs during the construction of, well, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one, and God forbid you run the entire project and they slap you with all these change orders at the end of it when you were kind of moving forward. But it's kind of just, it is an incurred situation, and here's a little bit less of my due diligence up front. I think it's going to cost this much, and we'll run it.
Yeah, I like years and years ago when I was getting started in construction, I was in a room with one of these guys where we're talking about the cost for this, and I asked him something about how much a certain element's going to cost, and he like kind of looks up at the ceiling, closes his eye a little bit, and then says, "Well, we got this many linear feet, and those things are this much. And it's going to take us okay. It's going to be exactly $22,000.
Right.
And I'm like, even way back then, I'm like, you serious? Like, that's the number?
Yeah.
Like, that's all you got to do. Like, just some, like, getting in touch with the universe for a minute, and then Right. So you're totally right. Like, with the cost plus, the incentives are aligned to get the lowest possible believable price in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because you want to get if you're the shady contractor, you want to get the client to sign, and then the way the contract's actually written is you're covered.
Yeah.
They have to pay for it.
Right.
So as long as they sign the contract, you're winning. Yeah. And the incentives are not aligned to give them a reasonable price. Because you give them a reasonable price, you're probably going to lose to somebody that has the philosophy that you give them the cheapest price.
Right.
Well, and you're motivated to be as actually vague and non-transparent as the contractor is motivated to be more vague and more non-transparent than anything else.
Yeah.
Because if he's super vague and it's like kind of complicated, so it's really hard to explain. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to come up with a number for that one, but it'll probably be about right here. It feels really believable that, okay, he really knows what he's talking about. There's like a lot of complex things that he's going to have to calculate here and get it done. Boy, I really want to go with the guy who can do it right. And he's going to be transparent about me. And when what he's doing is using a lot of super vague language. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Complicating it so that when he hands you lots of bills in that cost plus end state, you're going to pay him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's way more than that initial number.
Yeah. I talked to the engineer who was on that project months later, and he said, man, that guy, he doesn't know how to build squat, but man, I am amazed at his ability to talk people out of money.
Yeah, it's and I think clients don't even understand there's a certain level of project management that you have to do in that sense. A cost plus company, if you just let them run it, like we're talking about, they'll really just dig in, and it'll take as long as it takes, and I'm going to bill you for the hours. And if it's wasted days, like with all those wasted days you're paying for, where they're driving around, how many material runs are they going to do in that day? Like what are you even considering in that sense? Or So
there is so much waste in a remodeling project
care.
that's not done right.
Yeah, they're getting paid.
Like, you don't want to sign up with somebody where, like, if he does it in a wasteful way, you pay for all his waste.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually really hard to execute a remodeling project for a reasonable price that hits budget and, like, makes money. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to accept all that risk.
no. Yeah.
So let's talk about another category we've seen where the client hires a contractor who even I can think of several instances where the client thinks the contractor is going to pull permits, but that actually doesn't happen. You had a client, and I remember this from the initial call. We got the initial call, and the guy's line was, as he's telling this story, he says, like, the city called me up, and the city was like, "Hey, bro, you don't have a permit." And he was like, "What?"
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was working with this client last year, and it's just like every horror story you read online. And there were so many red flags along the way when he started telling me in depth of what happened and where he started with this contractor. I was like, that didn't register to you? That was a red flag? The guy drew plans for your basement on grid paper, and that's what you saw as far as your designs and concepts went. You didn't have anything else. You're putting it in a
But this happens over and over again. You got to give the guy some slack.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's a lack of knowing what they should look for in homeowners' eyes. And it's not that they're not super smart people. Like, some of the people that have hired contractors are actually super smart people. They're like software engineers or somebody that you would think, but they just don't play in that world. They don't know what to look for. And so when they're given drawings, they don't know that the drawings actually don't give enough clarity to even know what they're signing up for. Like, I remember a lady in Irvington or Sullivan's Gulch or somewhere in Portland where contractor is hired to do this kitchen plus addition. He gets halfway done, and then he moves to Florida with all of the rest of her money. And when she talks to him about it, he's like, "Well, we ran out of money." But then I look at the contract documents, and they're like the most basic drawings ever. And I talked to her, and he'd promised her like really expensive high-end cabinetry. But the problem is they've had a lot of conversations. The contract and the drawings, that's what governs the relationship in the project. That's what you're buying.
Right.
And if the drawings are like not clear, then you have no idea what you're buying.
Yeah, I mean, his inexperience in the getting remodels in the first place. Yeah, I felt it's pretty hard to hear those stories again. It's just the guy really talked. It was one of those contractors that talked his way up, and even so, I think he had an established background as a business, so you wouldn't know that he was doing anything incorrect. The only way that it really spurred up that he didn't file permits for the basement was when the electrician and plumber submitted their permits to do their work because they were professionals. And the county saw it, and they're like, "What are you doing to your basement? Why is this coming through? You have all this electrical and plumbing work being done down there." And I mean, it's very transparent and very honest. And fortunately, the county was really understanding and gave him a little bit of grace and extending out before they started really finding him. But they gave him a period. I think it's like 6 months to a year that you have to start the construction. But that guy argued to it. He's like, "Why are we even needed to pull permits?" They were on the phone, video calls with the client and the contractor and the county. And the guy was arguing egress sizes and arguing pulling the permits, and then trying to go back to the client and be like, "Listen, man, I was trying to save you some money. We don't really need to do this," and try to talk a way out of it. But I mean, it's a very big surprise because not only did that guy lose a lot of money, and he had to pay us do a lot of rework on this project. This other guy got away, in my opinion, way easier than I would have let him off. They signed an agreement to kind of get his money back, and half the cost of the work that he had done, but he didn't get all his money back. And the guy walked away without really getting slapped with a lawsuit. So,
that's a really interesting point, and it's actually in several of the clients I've talked to over the years is a theme. Like this guy he is a contractor, he does work, and he does probably, like he has clients that like him and have kept hiring him. And so he can come recommended and even do great jobs. Because partly remodeling, there's like a big broad, you could do deck repair, you could do basement remodeling, you could do a kitchen, you could do small projects, you could do large projects. And so several of the clients I've talked to, they've had a contractor that's either highly recommended from friends, or they even hired. We had a client call in recently that they're doing I don't remember the kind of project they're doing right now, but the project they recently did was an ADU. And so it was a standalone ADU, and they decided that they couldn't afford a design build firm. They interviewed one of our competitors. They'd hired him before. They loved them. They did great work. But they decided, they're premium price. I can't hire them. So they decided to find a smaller contractor similar to this. And they said, we're going to test this guy out on a couple small projects. Test him out on a couple small projects. He did an awesome job. And so then they decided, okay, we're going to hire him to do the ADU. So ADU's design, they get started, they sign a fixed price construction contract. And it's a contract for $200,000 to do this ADU. And then the contractor, makes changes and lets them know that there's going to be more costs coming. I didn't know exactly what kind of fixed price contract there was, but at the end of the day, the attorney that they had worked with told them never to sign anything without him reviewing it again. So it wasn't a legit fixed price contract. That's one of the things that I've seen with cost plus guys is they write fixed price contract at the top of the contract, but then all the language in the contract is cost plus. So I have 100% seen that. But this client ended up paying $450,000 to do this ADU, but they paid for it incrementally. And at the end, they got this bill and ended up having to pay this. And even after they got the attorney involved, if I know the story correctly, they got the attorney involved to try to solve this and not have to pay this, price that was more than 2x what they signed on. They ended up paying that because that's the way the contract was written, which, with having seen a couple pictures of the space, and my guess is actually probably about the right price that the higher priced premium company would have probably charged something similar to that. I think that is something that just because a contractor is great at deck repair or something like that doesn't mean he's going to be great at an ADU build.
Right. Yeah.
It's easy for a contractor to get in over their head. Because you start out small, you start out doing handyman stuff, you start out doing some deck repair, and then somebody wants you to do a large project, and it seems like a real opportunity. And you want to jump in and you do it. And if you don't have the breadth of knowledge or the background or breadth on your team to really deal with that and do the research and serve your client well, it's so easy to sign up for it and get in over your head. Yeah. And then you're doing either terrible work or terrible service to a client.
Well, and that's so true. That's even, I talk to friends of mine who, have gotten into handyman work and are starting to think about contracting and kitchen remodels and bathroom remodels. And I encourage them to, it looks like a really good idea because they're used to selling, $1,000 jobs, $2,000 jobs. And they have to juggle a lot of appointments and sales and scheduling. And it feels like it'd be so much easier if I could land a $50,000 kitchen remodel. Then I can just be at that job for 5 or 6 or 8 weeks. It doesn't matter. I don't have to schedule so many jobs, but there's a lot of ways to lose money and screw up a $60,000 job, but that's how people really, really easily just get in way over their head. And that's where most of these horror stories come from. I feel like there's a real small percentage of contractors that are legit con artists, like Mr. FBI guy. That guy's a con artist. but most of the horror stories that I feel like I hear is just a well-meaning guy that gets in way over his head.
Yeah, I remember when I first started my business, I was doing the same, doing very small jobs, just like when you guys first started out. But it's also when you start to level up, you're saying yes to pretty much anything. You're like, I'm going to say yes to that. Just a perfect example, like you just said, is I took on a kitchen remodel, and I was doing a bunch of small jobs, a lot of drywall repair. I was doing painting, some minor siding, setting windows. And then this kitchen remodel came around, and I had concrete countertops to do. And I have zero experience in concrete countertops, but there wasn't a lot of square footage there. Oh boy, did I learn how to do that in the end. And it wasn't at the cost of the client. I was a true fixed price. I did not hit her with a bunch of change orders. I was just getting my feet wet really into business.
Yeah.
And I didn't want the extra level of stress on the client if I took longer. So yeah, you might be the guinea pig for a project if you think that if the contractor seems like he's good enough and he's saying, yeah, I can do that. Absolutely, I can do that. And then he tests out his new learned skills on your house. And that could really, fortunately, mine didn't end up bad. There's plenty of research and background that I did to really understand what I had to do to make it success. But that's not for every case. There's a lot of contractors that are like, oh yeah, I will do that. And you just have to really pay attention to the initial starting stages of that project to define whether it's going to end well or not.
Yeah.
The finishes are easy.
Yeah, it is interesting because you see like contractors grow their companies. You see, I feel like everybody wants to find this amazing craftsman who hasn't figured out how to charge enough money to stay in business, but is just like you, where he's if he misprices it or something, he's going to fall on his sword, so they can get an amazing deal. But like that guy only exists for a moment in time until he does one project and loses his shorts and realizes that he needs to charge more money. So that he doesn't go out of business.
Yeah, simple things. I lost my butt on freight. I was in Alaska in a really small town, and I didn't really factor in when I was estimating projects that I was going to have to drive 5 hours to get to the closest Home Depot. I was going to have to freight things, and I'm like, oh, you want that? It's on Wayfair? Sure. Had no idea I was going to have to get all this material, especially materials that I was used to working with, like Weddy board or Hydroblock. And they didn't sell that in Alaska, so I had to get that, just the smallest of things to build out a bathroom. And it took me a few ones to realize, I'm like sitting there looking at my profits and going, oh, this is going to be a great job for me. And every other week I'm driving up to Anchorage, 5 hours, spending the night, and then eating. And oh my gosh, it just really started to see that drop where, if you don't pay attention to it and you're doing the time and material costs, and that guy doesn't even understand freight or all that kind of stuff. I mean, he's going to hit you with a lot of things that he didn't put in his original estimate. And he's just going to be like, well, this is something I missed, but you got to pay for it anyways because we signed this kind of a contract.
Right. Well, and I think that speaks to even the amount of factors that go into completing a construction project accurately. Your jurisdiction, your geographical, your weather. Like if you haven't been in that area for a long time doing this, working with everything from the municipality who governs the permits to how the weather affects the work and the quality, there's so many factors that even go beyond good building. A good carpenter can come from anywhere, but if they haven't been established in that area, they're not going to know how to build in that area.
Nope.
Yeah. They're going to miss a lot of things.
Oh yeah. It's totally different construction up there when in Alaska as even opposed to here.
Oh yeah.
Frost levels and everything. It's just crazy. So
and I think
it's not general.
This idea of like getting out over your shoe, especially like fairly well-intentioned people getting out over their shoes, and then it's interesting not getting out of their shoes. Over their head or out of their skis. Now I've got like this guy with like really big shoes. So
This is over his head, so he's upside down.
Over his head, big shoes. He's got some skis. This sounds like a really great.
Sounds like he needs to get out.
Sounds like me when I'm trying to ski.
So, but along the topic, I feel like many of these are just a well-meaning, and that's partly why they come highly recommended. Right. Like we had a guy I knew, it was Southeast Portland. He had a guy replacing his roof, came super highly recommended, great contractor. And as they're thinking about the roof and stuff, it's going to cost a lot of money to replace the roof because you got to redo the sheathing and all that. And he thought, well, while we're doing this, we got a big attic there. Like, why don't we do like a second story addition on top of my home while we're at it?
Yeah.
And so the guy, he talks to the contractor, like, do you know how to do engineering and that kind of stuff? He says, no problem. And so they move ahead with it, start doing it. And about halfway through the project, he realizes that we don't technically have any permits. The contractor has a buddy who like may or may not be an engineer, and he's talked to a few times, but we actually don't have a real permit. So he starts talking to the city. He drives down to City Hall. He talks to the city, like, what are we actually going to need to get permits? The city says, well, we need drawings. So this guy thinks, okay, well, how do I get drawings? I have to get an architect involved. He talks to an architect. The architect comes out and says,
you went too far.
The architect like has a conniption fit. This is a 100-plus-year-old house that they're putting the addition on top of, and the addition, normally when you build a second-story addition, you've got to think about two things from an engineering perspective. For those of you guys that don't know, you've got to think about lateral pressure, so the wind blows against the side of your house, you don't want it to collapse. Mm-hmm. Then you've got to think about gravity, right? You don't want them to collapse just standing there. Or like people jumping on the floor or something. All the weight, you don't want to collapse from that. And so normally on a second story addition, you're going to line the exterior wall of the upper story addition with your lower story addition, because then you deal with all your gravity right there. It's wonderful. And the lateral loads are real easy to tie into that same plane, because the way you deal with lateral loads are you build, basically shear walls. So rectangular panels, either inside or on the exterior wall, most commonly, to prevent collapse. Right? This guy decided for no apparent reason to build the exterior wall like about 1.5 feet on the inside. Yeah. Of the exterior wall, and just land it all on the existing rafters, and then build the staircase up a little bit so you could have the rafters kind of coming up and the floor sits right here, and you chop off the rafters. And it was like a convoluted framing nightmare. And so after talking to the architect, this guy gets in touch with us and says, guys, I don't know what to do. This is a disaster. And so we're part of the FIR program. So we had our FIR inspector out there, and we all met on site, and we came to the conclusion that it was a disaster. They had like carried a couple columns down into the crawl space, but they weren't landing on anything significant. Right. So there were like no footings in the crawl space. Oh, yeah. So we got our engineer involved. We went through, redesigned it. And it was great that they had what they told us was a beam supporting the structure. And this process took quite a while, because it always takes way longer to figure out what's going on and redesign stuff and get that permitting process as opposed to just doing it normally. And so it had been like, and this guy didn't have a lot of extra cash, so he had to go sue the other contractor to get enough cash to move forward. So it was like a year later, we come back and the kitchen ceiling is doing this. Because this beam that was supposed to be there wasn't there. There was a drywall box around what was supposed to be a beam, and there was no beam in there.
Oh my Lord.
And so so it was even more of a disaster than we thought. But we had to basically just come in here and like stabilize the existing thing. And, it was tremendous that we had a wonderful engineer who could think outside the box and like come up with some creative solutions to not cause us, because the easy, simple thing is to like knock the thing off the house and just do it right. But the homeowner didn't have the money to do that. So we came up with creative solutions to like stabilize it. We had an inspector that's part of the FUR program in Portland who like worked with us. And even though they're creative ideas, they work and they're not going to fall over, and he'll sign off on them. And so we were able to like deliver to this guy a safe house. Because what he had before, after he'd gone through this experience, was like totally not safe, which was just, that's probably one of the craziest experiences we've had coming in, cleaning up a mess.
Yeah, you'll see a lot out there too. It's as many of experiences and stories I've heard from clients along the way. Coming from the field, you see a lot more that clients had no idea even what happened, and you're digging it apart and going, "Holy Lord!" And especially during the 90s when they were just pumping out houses, they were using scrap materials for anything. It was cheap then. They were just like, oh, I got all this stuff left over. Let me chuck it up in there. And just a bunch of work that you just are like baffled by. How did they even pass inspections on some of these things? Or just blows my mind.
Totally.
But, it is just, some of those contractors just get away with a lot. You'll never even know it. Like the horror stories are actually buried inside your home. You have no idea. If you've got 100-year-old home, there's a lot of horror stories you just aren't aware of. So
what are some of the craziest things we've seen in the field as we've torn stuff apart? I can think of like, the missing beam was certainly absurd. The other things that I think we've seen is when somebody, this was another beam thing in Portland. There's a beam under this. It was a wonderful Sears home from the Sears kits in the like 20s, and there was a beam running the length of the basement. Typically, the homes are maybe about 25, 30 feet wide, and then they're deep. So this, maybe 40, 50 feet deep, and the joists run left to right, and there's a beam that holds up the middle of the house, and there's columns there. And this one, they had a new HVAC system installed, and so HVAC guy comes in and just chops the beam in half in between columns. And on one of the columns, the beam broke it ended and a new beam started, so the beam was joined. And so there was one beam holding up part of the house that was like just cantilevered off this post. And like, so there was 6 inches on the post and like 2 feet out holding up nothing. And then your HVAC duct.
Beams are probably the most common thing that people will just chop out posts and do all that work. But you'll see it not only just from a general contractor that's doing all the structural work on your home, but the electricians and plumbers that are inexperienced and don't fully understand the structural components. So I can't even tell you how many times I've seen plumbers just chop out floor joists, just completely notch them out completely all the way through, or more than 3/4 of the way through, and electricians doing the exact same thing. And you walk down there and it's just baffles you that you're like, your house is, dude, you got this whole trough that's gone in your floor joist here. How has that not cause any more significant damage? There's plenty of nails inside of a home. Is your house going to completely fall apart in some of those cases? Not yet. Over time, you're going to experience a lot of micro sagging first, and a lot of creaking and stuff going on.
And normally, like, it's similar to a general contractor who is well-intentioned but has gone out over his head. Like what I see in those kind of things is just the apprentice has showed up that day,
no idea,
got out over his head, and is doing something he's not sure about. He saw somebody else drill some joists to get pipes through, or he knows his HVAC duct has to go where this beam is, and he didn't know why the beam's there because he's second day on the job, well-meaning, and just just gets out there. But let's talk for a little bit about like why and how can I as a homeowner avoid these things? Because it sounds like there's a lot of ways that this can get screwed up. How can I avoid it?
Well, I can piggyback off of what you were just saying in terms of there are a lot of well-meaning people out there, and they're in every trade, they're in every part of the city departments, they're all over the place. And one of the things that I think is important in an excellent team is the team part of it. If you've got more than one person looking at the project, double checking it, who's understanding what's going on, who's been in construction for a long time. There's times even on our job sites where we'll walk in and we'll double check work done by our subcontractors. Not because we don't trust them, not because they are not excellent in their field, but because 2-3 sets of eyes means we're double checking it from multiple angles. And so I would start there. Like if you're working with a team that's been around, that has a depth of experience in different aspects of construction, you're far better protected.
Yeah, you're unlikely to find a whole group of people with bad intentions.
Right.
Nobody gets in cahoots to like really hurt people and financially and really damage their home.
You might find a bad actor. It's a little harder to find a conspiracy.
Yeah, and we even talk about that internally about somebody getting job blind, and I feel like, having a team and having depth and having backup to make sure that we don't have the apprentice going off and, well-meaning, but cuts the trust.
Right.
That they've got a team behind them to make sure that doesn't happen, or if it does, it gets corrected. So I think that's fantastic. What else can a client do to make sure that they don't get themselves in this kind of situation?
Well, I mean, I would say, always stay curious as to really what's going on with your home. I mean, I would never invite someone into my property and not really try to understand everything that they're doing as well. If it comes down to a lot of work that does involve permitting, are there going to be inspections? Like, are you expecting to see an inspector come out to the house and inspect their work as well? Because that's the second eyes that are really important for them. So monitor when those things are really going to come during construction. Are you going to be present to understand, did they do their job right? Yeah. Are those permits getting closed out even? Because they could throw those permits in, fail inspections, not even tell you about it, run the whole project through and never get that closed out. And that will never actually be, you'll see that come back at you at some point, but really just paying attention to, hopefully understanding a schedule, seeing what's going on in that schedule, because that will help you understand, are they doing the right steps to make this a successful project?
And I think what you're saying about asking good questions is really important, because I've encountered clients and homeowners who feel like, well, I don't want to make them feel bad. Like, I don't want to ask questions. It's like calls in their integrity into question, and I don't want to be that guy. Right. But frankly, if you're asking respectful questions, your contractor should be welcoming those and providing you with good answers.
Sure.
And they may even have an answer. It's like, look, I don't know the answer, but I'll go find it and get back to you. That's a good actor there, typically. Like, that's going to be a good contractor who welcomes those questions. It's the guys who are like, man, trust me.
Oh, yeah, right?
That scares me.
I know. I think all of us that are really have good intentions love to be educators to the industry, right? Yeah. Like, I love telling clients, hey, this is how it works. This is what I'm actually doing, if they are interested. And when you get those shady guys that are really kind of trying not to answer your questions, then there's probably some point you need to start reconsidering whether that's the guy you work with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that communication is key, and you're asking questions is not a problem.
No.
As long as you're being respectful. I mean, there's always a wrong way to go about it, but those respectful questions, I think, are actually an essential part of finding the right contractor. Just
like when you go to hire any other professional to do anything, whether that's a doctor or an attorney or a music teacher or like whatever you're going to go hire, you want to hire the right one for the right job. And I think that is a commonality of somebody that gets over their head. Is he might be a great deck repair guy, but he's not a good addition guy. And so that's the case of like the family doctor getting hired to do brain surgery. and he's probably not going to be good at it.
Yeah.
So how do you identify the right contractor for the right project?
I think you could really look at their portfolio. I mean, it really depends on like, have they done this before?
Yeah.
Those are very simple, and how many, right? I mean, go check their website. If you're interested in doing a kitchen remodel, most contractors are doing kitchens. Those are bread and butter. That's either doing kitchens and bathrooms. Those are the first two not easy projects. I want a blanket statement that. But if they don't have a record of jobs that they've done with some proud moments of success, then there's probably some point you should reconsider that as a contractor, even give a call to. So, before you call, look at their portfolio, check in some of the things that they've done in relation to the project you're trying to achieve. So,
yeah, I would also say, like, in general, raising your expectations. Like, think about, like, you're about to spend $20 or $50 or $100,000 on a thing. If it wasn't a contractor, like, would you go hire somebody that was obviously disorganized or couldn't communicate well or couldn't show up on time or any of those kinds of things? Like, I certainly would not, because you've got a lot of money at risk because it's a high risk product that you're buying, a high risk service that you're buying, because by definition of the money that you're spending. Yeah. If you need somebody to come in and like fix your deck for like $1,500 or $500, you could put up with somebody that's late or something like that, because the risk is pretty low. Like, worst case scenario, he doesn't fix it, you fire him, you have to find someone else, and you've lost $500. If you get worst case scenario at $100,000, he did it wrong, didn't pull permits, you have to hire someone else to pay them $100,000 to fix it. Like, it's a massive risk there. And so understand the level of risk. So look at their portfolio. Like, have they done the exact kind of project that I have done? Not once, not twice, like a lot of times. And do they really know what they're doing there? And then, are they showing up in the way that I expect somebody to show up, that I'm going to cut a check for this amount of money? I think those are really important things.
Yeah, and I don't think, and something to even point out is most clients don't even understand, I guess, what requires a permit. And the real simple answer is most construction requires a permit of some sort. Either it's over-the-counter electrical, it's over-the-counter plumbing. But, if you're ripping out walls, if you're doing anything of substantial deconstruction in your home, there's likely a permit that's going to be necessary there. And if you're not seeing that in your first estimate, then that's probably a red flag, and you can question that. Like, is there going to be permits necessary for this job? We're taking out this wall. And sometimes you don't necessarily need that for if it's non-load bearing in a lot of ways. But, you should always consider and understand that there's likely a permit in a heavy construction project. If it's simple drywall repair, all that kind of stuff, either YouTube it, you could probably figure out how to do it. And I would suggest too, because a lot of people should be able to do their own homework. It's just like changing the oil on a car. That's a simple task that you could learn online and not really screw up anything there. But there's handyman, right? That's something that you would call it handyman for. If even on a deck project, that could be a little bit broader. If it's a second story, if it's on a second story, then we've got to really get the right guy to do that. That's going to take all the right steps, make sure that it doesn't damage your home or injure themselves, and you're liable for it. So
yeah, I think there's a couple of basic things you could think about. I think your point about the permit is really good, and for a homeowner who's like not super well versed in how construction works, what that looks like, you can call your local buildings jurisdiction and ask them, I want to replace a window. Does that take a permit? Right. And it might sound like a dumb question, but they're typically very happy to tell you. And that's at least the first bar where you're like, oh, if it needs a permit, I don't want to hire the local handyman.
No.
I should probably find somebody with a reputation who's got a team who can take care of this. I would say life safety considerations are another bar above. And this is where, like, the guy with the addition who just hired his roofer to do it, that blows my mind. Because if I start and work backwards off of, well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, if he does this addition wrong, it falls down and kills people. Oh, that's really bad. That's probably a really big deal, and I should hire somebody that's got a team that's done this before, that knows my area, that knows the engineering that needs to be done to make this safe. And that's even where, like, the deck example is great, right? You start with, well, I just need a little deck repair, like a couple of boards or whatever. True, but think about your deck. Is it 2 stories up, built on a hillside? Oh, well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, he cuts a few boards wrong, and then your deck falls apart, and he dies, and you've got an insurance claim. And oh, wow, well, I should probably call somebody who's got a lot better reputation than the local handyman. Now, there's also times where I've got a rotten board on my deck, and it's like less than the foot off the ground, and it's like 100 square feet. Then yeah, you could call the handyman. So some of this just is common sense.
Right.
And you're thinking about risk levels. What's the worst that could go wrong that I can imagine?
Yeah.
And how would I deal with it?
Yeah. And they're licensing, right? You can, I mean, like the roofer
Absolutely.
is a specialty trade. That's not a general contractor's license.
Right.
So, you know, maybe educate yourself a little bit on what type of contractors and what their licensing is required. There's definitely different stages of that. And, you know, the specific handymen and then specialty trades are not. And there's a cost limit too to those trades, right? They can only do up to 15K or 20K, even in 50K on certain levels of general contractors, I believe. And so, like, further up, if you're thinking of anything 50 and above to a $100,000 project, you're likely going to have to get a general contractor anyways, because those other contractors can't operate as a business under that cost of a project because they don't have the licensing bonding for that.
I think there's some good thoughts in terms of, like, evaluate the risk and understand, like, what am I signing up for? Raise standards of professionalism. Like, don't just because your experience has been maybe hiring handyman in the past, don't expect that that's what you have to hire to do a bigger project. There are contractors that specialize in doing that. And I would say the last thing that I encourage people to do is really inspect what you expect. Like we talked about earlier, especially like these con artist characters, like they're like this one guy, his one skill was talking people out of money. And so if you evaluate him exclusively on his ability to talk to you when you meet with him, that's not a good way to evaluate him because he's good at that. And so I encourage people to like really inspect and look at the contract, the actual contract you're going to sign. I'm actually surprised that we don't have clients that ask to look at our contract early on in the process. Yeah. We almost never do. Often, you know, I've taken a contract packet or an example one and showed it to people to say, hey, here's what we end up signing so that they understand how we communicate. But like almost nobody asks for that. They assume everybody's contract and everything is exactly the same. I encourage people to ask to see like actual designs from an actual project that has recently been completed so you know what that communication looks like. Almost nobody ever asks for that here. When they talk to us. And that really surprises me because that means you're basing your whole decision on like how I feel about this guy, his ability to talk, and then the proposal with whatever number is on that. And the other thing that I encourage people to inspect is like a schedule from a real live actual project. Yeah. Like, and is this project on schedule? Because we were having a conversation internally with, I don't remember who here, talking about schedules. And somebody made the comment like, well, lots of contractors actually, they don't really have a real schedule. They just like, they know the order of operations that mostly should happen and they get started and they do the things and it gets done. And there's like no actual schedule or plan, which if you don't care when the project's done, like that could be fine. Yeah. But if you want a contractor who like has a schedule and can stay on schedule and you know when you can move back into your house, like that would be an important thing to inspect. And you can ask the contractor and he can talk and tell you how amazing he is at scheduling. But anybody we've talked about could do that. What anybody we've talked about cannot do would be like show you a schedule from a recent project that they're on track to finish.
Right. Yeah, those are some as we talked about earlier, just understanding like what's involved in the schedule, walking you through that level of transparency. And, even thinking back when I was a contractor, I still had good intentions. I just didn't know that was something in the industry that people did share. It was kind of shooting from the hip is I can give you an estimated timeline of how long I think this project is going to take. And that was the level of transparency there. I was like, I think this is going to be a two and a half month project. I think that's realistic. And now really what went through there, the only thing that I was tracking as far as schedule is when I was receiving my materials. That was the only thing because of when it had to be done.
Yeah.
But that client really, I didn't really talk to her and show her that. But I don't think it would have been bad. I would have showed her when her materials are arriving, when I expect to do the tiling of her shower, or the cabinetry because of all that being installed. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Well, and I think what you do when you inspect what you expect is you just really understand who you're hiring better. Mm-hmm. Like there are tons of well-intentioned contractors, and sometimes people go out specifically seeking a newer contractor who maybe hasn't got his pricing dialed in because they hope they're going to get a better price or a better deal. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't, like we talked about earlier. The final price was exactly the same as the hiring contractor. But they do sacrifice the ability to know when the project's going to be done, know exactly what the project's going to cost up front, and then typically not have as many surprises along the way. Yeah. And so, if those things are important to you, just raise your standards of what you're looking for and inspect what you expect. Yeah. If you're out looking for you want to accept more of the risk on yourself, and you don't care about when the project's done. You want to accept the risk yourself. You've done 10 basement remodels yourself. You know roughly what they cost. He says it's going to be 100. It's probably 200. You want to budget for that. You can accept all that risk on yourself, and sometimes that can work out great. But if you inspect what you expect, if you really inspect some of those things, then you'll know what you're signing up for. Most people see all the contractors as the same. They sign up for somebody without really knowing what kind of contractor they sign up for.
Yeah, and partly off of that, I would almost take it to really understanding of how invasive is it going to be on your life as well. Yeah. Because with a contractor that is a smaller business in a lot of ways, they might have three or four more jobs running at the same time. Is yours a big one in priority? And they could tell you it could take 2 months, but is that 2 months of you being on a site every day? It's take 2 months of you being here segmented throughout the way. But that's in total. Really, it took 4 months. It was 2 months of your work on site. So, and also just don't be in a rush, right? It's I would say when you're looking at a schedule, don't try to find the guy that's going to do it fast to get it done, because that's a pipe dream. That's not reality. Most people, they do have some substantial groups of team that they can get it done in an efficient manner, but realistic timelines. Ask your contractors, every single one you're working with, generally, how long do you think this could take? I think that'd be an easy opening question. And if you repeat that question and everyone's telling you the same amount of time, well, then I think you've got the right path to understand the schedule later as well.
That's great. Well, let's wrap it up. I would say if you want to know more about how to hire a contractor, how to find one, the different types of contractors, we're covering some of that in the other episodes in this podcast series. And you can go to our website and find our contractor interview guide. And this gives some specific questions that if I was looking for a contractor, I would be asking. And some specific examples of what you should see in Inspect What You Expect, and specific things to ask to inspect. And you can go get that by just going to our website and then search Contractor Interview Guide. And you'll be able to download that there, and hopefully that will be helpful. And I will see you on the other podcast episodes.